A mountain slope collapses. It's too hot. The permafrost is melting. The cause is the rise in greenhouse gases. CO2 emissions need to be cut, much more quickly than has been planned. More and more court rulings are calling for that. The Sonnenblick Observatory is perched more than 3,000 meters up in the Hohe Tauern National Park in Austria. Here, scientists are studying weather and climate change. This building dates back 135 years and has withstood snowstorms and gale force winds. So far. Elke Ludewig and Mark Orlefs are doing important work up here. With dozens of measuring devices, the climate researchers are recording the rise of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The temperatures here have already risen, on average, 2 degrees Celsius, with knock-on effects.
This is the northern terrace of the Sonnenblick Observatory. Here in particular, and on the northern flank, you can clearly see the effects of climate change up here in the mountains, and the measures and adaptations needed to protect this infrastructure. There's a lot of concrete under here. The entire terrace is concreted over so no water can penetrate.
The concrete posts are also shoring up the mountain peak. The reason for all these measures is climate change. Permafrost normally holds together the mountain's interior, but it's melting. 200 iron bolts and a steel net now stop the mountain from crumbling. Although the observatory is far from any industry or other greenhouse gas emitters, the researchers are finding that carbon dioxide concentrations keep on rising. Here at Sonnenblick, but also at the other end of the world, at Mauna Loa Observatory on Hawaii, for example. It's the same problem everywhere.
The curve from Mauna Loa is amazingly similar. Measurements there were started in 1958 and are the world's longest running. We now have 420 ppm. That's 0.04% CO2 in the atmosphere, almost the same as in Hawaii. It clearly shows it doesn't matter where and when CO2 is emitted, it's globally distributed super fast.
That also means the Earth will only stop heating up when CO2 emissions drop worldwide. That's precisely what happened during the COVID pandemic and was measurable at Sonnenblick.
The global shutdown in the pandemic led to a drop of about 6% of global CO2 emissions. To reach the Paris Agreement's goal, we'd need to cut emissions by 6% every year between now and 2050. That shows just how dramatic the reduction is that's needed.
Time is pressing. The EU aims to become climate neutral by 2050. With net zero emissions, it remains unclear how that is to be achieved. Climate change is creating anxiety, fears felt by Martina Doppen. The 27-year-old decided to fight back. With other climate activists, she filed a suit against an oil multinational. Its logo, a seashell.
We won the court case against one of the biggest polluters of the world, Shell. A Dutch company, which is super powerful, and we showed that the movement is actually more powerful, and that this is the point of return, actually, that we are kind of starting to win.
Shell's core business is oil and petrochemicals. Fossil fuels release millions of tons of CO2 when they combust. In May 2021, a court in The Hague ruled that Royal Dutch Shell had to reduce its CO2 emissions by 45% by 2030. It was a legal sensation. Also for Donald Pols, a co-plaintiff. Martina Doppen meets him on the Dutch North Sea coast. Donald Pols is head of the environment organisation Milieu Defensie. The judgment is the first in the world which calls upon a company to curb its greenhouse gas emissions.
To be honest, the whole court case would not have been possible if it wasn't for people like you and the 17,000 other co-plaintiffs, the people that financially supported it with more than €500,000.
Shell is appealing the ruling, but the judge's message is loud and clear. It has set a precedent. Worldwide, there are about 1,000 such claims pending. Is fighting climate change in the courts an opportunity to make real progress? Martina Doppen thinks so.
What drives me as an activist is that we see the effects of climate change everywhere for a very long time already, and especially in the global south. We see floodings in Mozambique, the oil spills in Nigeria, the heat waves in USA, in Canada, and yet we don't do anything. Like, policymakers are failing to act, so there's a lot of activism needed. And now it's also coming closer by. Like, at the moment, there is big floodings in the south of the Netherlands and in Germany. People are missing, people are dying.
In July 2021, extreme rainfall and catastrophic flooding, the worst in many, many decades, had devastating effects in Western Germany. Many people were made homeless for months. More than 170 people died. Hundreds were injured and many had to be evacuated. Residents lost their homes and their livelihoods. A few days earlier, the US and Canada had seen temperatures of over 50 degrees Celsius. Fires destroyed residential estates and entire villages. Dozens died of heat exhaustion. Climate change is making extreme weather events like this more frequent. For over 30 years, scientists have been raising the alarm and urging a major rethink. Before the pandemic, hundreds of thousands of young people held climate protests that hit the headlines, yet no major policy changes were forthcoming. Then in April 2021, Germany's Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe declared the Federal Climate Change Act unconstitutional in parts. The top judges said it particularly violated the younger generation's right to freedom because if current measures were too lax now, they would lead to disproportionate costs after 2030.
These future obligations to reduce emissions have an impact on practically every type of freedom, because virtually all aspects of human life still involve the emission of greenhouse gases, and are thus potentially threatened by drastic restrictions after 2030.
It is the most far-reaching top court ruling on climate change in the world. Freedom is also the freedom of future generations and the freedom of all the people worldwide, and needs counterbalancing over time. That's a sensation.
Felix Eckhardt co-represented the case. The law professor is the director of the Research Unit Sustainability and Climate Policy in Leipzig. He can see the impact of climate change in the city's Auwald forest. The droughts of recent years are endangering ash trees and sycamore maples. But the expert says it's not just the wood's future that's in danger.
Climate change threatens to destroy democracy's physical foundations. Climate crises, wars, water shortages and mass migration will leave little behind of our free lives, or even of symbolic but vital things like the German forest. Nature in its current form in Germany, European nature, will no longer exist in this form with unchecked climate change. We need a swift, radical exit from fossil fuels in all sectors.
Felix Eckhardt has achieved something historic together with environmental organizations and other individuals. Though the obligation to protect the environment is enshrined in the German constitution, it had led to little action. The decision is also getting a lot of attention from legal experts. Up to now, only people directly affected by climate change had a chance of bringing their case to court. Some constitutional law specialists believe that it might lead to a new understanding of the law across the EU.
Some are saying it's an actio popularis, and that any individual could now sue due to insufficient action on climate change. That's not quite true, but it has opened up this restrictive law and given access to the court. And it has recognized the concern of citizens in the wider sense, so that it is now possible to refer a bit to future developments, and that's important for curbing climate change.
Across the world, people are experiencing record-breaking temperatures. The Sonnenblick scientists are also seeing them rise. The world is only 0.9 degrees away from the maximum 2-degree increase in the Paris Agreement. If global warming continues, the situation could spin out of control.
The tipping points in the climate system, changes that are no longer stoppable within a human timescale, can be found throughout the entire climate system, whether it be vegetation, ocean currents, or ice sheets. We cannot define the temperatures that would trigger these, individual or multiple tipping points. But we know the higher that global temperatures rise, the more likely it is that we reach these tipping points.
The ecological subsistence level is linked to human dignity. Germany's constitutional court has made a ruling about the social subsistence level. There is, of course, also an ecological one. That, in turn, is connected to planetary limits. If we exceed these planetary limits, the so-called tipping points, we could face a scenario of utter destruction. This would leave us in an environment where it was practically impossible to find existential living conditions fit for human beings.
We continue to extract fossil fuels like coal and oil, and so the emission of greenhouse gases continues undiminished. Some 37 billion tons of CO2 are pumped into the atmosphere each year, more than the Earth can cope with. The Earth's atmosphere is like a bathtub filling up with greenhouse gases, but the plug to drain the tub is only tiny. Since humans began producing more and more greenhouse gases, CO2 levels have risen, and so have temperatures. Global temperatures are now 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. As the bath fills up with more and more greenhouse gases, CO2 concentrations are increasing. It can remain in the atmosphere for up to 1,000 years. If the courts are now calling for urgent measures to stop climate change, why is climate legislation falling so short? Herr Rieden in Franconia. In his party, CSU politician and longtime parliamentarian Joseph Goeppel has gained a reputation as a climate change pioneer. He filed the legal suit along with Felix Eckhardt, an indirect challenge to his own party.
I am very happy, as this is a very big signal from outside the political sphere. The political class would not have mustered the strength itself to agree real climate protection measures that require changes in lifestyle.
The court ruled in favor of Joseph Goeppel, even though he is not personally threatened by climate change. That can't be said for his home region, which now suffers from ever longer lasting droughts. Joseph Goeppel hopes the ruling will be a wake-up call for his fellow lawmakers.
I estimate that at least half of the parliamentarians believe that things won't become anywhere as bad as made out. There is a lack of awareness, and that is also connected to the professional backgrounds of the lawmakers. People with science backgrounds are in a minority. That's one thing. But even the more neutral ones have a get-out. And that is, we can manage the changes with improvements in technology.
But the CSU politician is convinced that technological advances alone are not enough. He says there is too little time left. Back in Leipzig's Auwald, Felix Eckhardt also believes speed is of the essence. He plans to file further suits against the German government and says the new Climate Change Act doesn't go far enough. He also plans to go before the European Court of Human Rights.
The climate involves weighing up different spheres of freedom You sue when the parliamentary majority has exceeded its jurisdictional bounds. We're basically suing the legislative, and will very likely file another suit. But administrative decisions, like planning permission for roads or power plants, will also soon face more legal challenges.
The ruling made by Germany's constitutional court is not an isolated case. Top courts elsewhere are also coming to similar judgments. Democracies with functioning judiciaries are leading the way. Judges in France, Ireland, Belgium and the Netherlands have reached decisions similar to their German counterparts. Environmental and climate protection is enshrined in law in many other countries. It is even part of the constitution in 110 states. 189 countries have signed up to the Paris Agreement, but it is not possible to go to court to directly enforce legal compliance. How much action is being taken on the ground to curb climate change, at local authority level, for example? A few years ago, a toy manufacturer built a logistics centre in Joseph Goebbels' hometown of Herrieden. Arable land, equivalent to 25 soccer pitches in area, were covered over with concrete and asphalt, another climate killer. The business wanted more warehouses. The expansion plans are currently off the table, but the farmers next door remain suspicious. The CSU politician and climate activist Joseph Goebbels meets the Wismüllers, who mainly grow rye here. The land is very fertile. The farmers are very worried the local council might relent and give the company the go-ahead.
No one asks you whether you want to sell or not. It is simply agreed. They say that's the zoning plan, and it has been earmarked for certain uses, and that's that. That's not good, and we don't want to sell it. It's our property, and we've been tending the land for generations.
The Wismüllers and Joseph Goebbels argue that if land is built over to create new industrial estates, it doesn't just mean the loss of valuable arable land. Agriculture is one of the few sectors which store carbon in a natural way.
Open, breathable soils have been undervalued up to now in the entire climate debate. They absorb CO2 from the air, and the organisms in that soil convert that to carbon and store it in the humus. That is how it works.
Land farmed in a climate-neutral manner plays a vital role, along with forests and moorlands. If local authorities and investors aim to develop greenfield sites, they can expect legal challenges in the common interest.
A very important and very welcome part of the motivation behind the Constitutional Court's climate ruling is that it also focuses on how freedoms are shared between the generations. And precisely that is formulated in a long-dormant article of our basic law. It says future generations must be taken into account. That's what has happened here. If we don't act now, and that's already late enough, the impact will be all the more drastic on future generations. The longer we wait, the more drastic the impact on future freedoms.
Measures are necessary, but what should we do when key industries are among the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide? Cement is a basic constituent of concrete and practically irreplaceable in the construction industry. Worldwide, it's responsible for emitting twice as much CO2 as air traffic. The problem is the process of turning limestone into cement. Limestone contains carbon dioxide, and when it's decarbonized in large furnaces, the CO2 escapes into the atmosphere.
Chemically speaking, limestone is calcium carbonate, lime and CO2. These two split during the burning process. They have to be separated, otherwise cement wouldn't harden after water is added. The CO2 emissions created during this process are the really big challenge we face.
For many years, the cement industry has been working on techniques that would allow it to produce as much concrete, but with less cement, less limestone and less energy, despite rising demand. The construction industry has been booming in recent years, but that's bad news for the climate. and the cement industry will not find the answer on its own.
We need a three-pronged approach involving industry, politics and society. If we don't work together, we won't succeed. All the technological challenges, which we had to master up to now, they were challenges that we could, more or less, master on our own. Procedural optimization, energy-saving measures, low-emission targets. We could do that. But now we are for the first time in a situation where we can offer the technological prerequisites on the one hand, but on the other, we also need renewable energy. We know how difficult it is to expand capacity in this area. The whole thematic field opens up.
The cement industry aims to become climate neutral by the year 2050. It's a project that will cost billions, costs that could be shared with the state. Yet the path to climate neutrality also presents an enormous economic opportunity for businesses that cut CO2 emissions more quickly than their competitors. In financial centers like Frankfurt, it's already become apparent that companies that are profitable and climate-friendly too are attracting more investors. Hannah Helmke, the founder and CEO of Right Based on Science, has developed a model that enables the CO2 emissions generated throughout a company's entire value chain to be calculated. First of all, a company's entire workflow is analyzed, and all emissions are recorded. Then a projection is used to work out how quickly the temperature of the Earth would rise if all companies acted in the same way. The result is a theoretical temperature in degrees Celsius.
The special thing about this model is that it's forward-looking. So if I'm a business and I project my temperature in this way, it might tell me 4 degrees. So if all businesses were like mine, then global warming would be 4 degrees, and that's uncomfortable. I'd rather not know that. But this model also gives me the opportunity to change in the future and to say, I'm not going to carry on as before. I'm going to reduce my emissions. I'm going to change my business model. I'm going to be innovative in terms of developing my business.
This data allows companies to tackle the climate impact of their business more efficiently. Which areas are more harmful and which less so? Curbing climate change becomes part of the business model. Fund managers at one German bank are already using it for customers who want to invest in particularly green businesses. The software shows in the projection how close the business would be to meeting the Paris Agreement's lower 1.5 degree target.
That's the art, finding the most profitable companies which are conforming to the Paris Agreement and also fulfill the expectations of the customers and the investors in terms of dividends. And with the XDC, with our forecast, we've actually found a link between temperature and profitability and also risk.
The new economics, the new philosophy, a company can survive when it consistently pursues climate-friendly policies. Climate activists like Martina Doppen and Donald Pols are pursuing the same goal, but using different means. They are suing big companies that are not reducing their greenhouse gas emissions quickly enough. IPCC analyses show that action is urgently needed. The Earth is already 1.1 degrees warmer than before industrialization. If the global community exceeds the Paris Agreement's 1.5 to 2 degree target, the consequences will be dramatic. Heat waves and droughts would directly threaten up to 420 million people. There would be water and food shortages. Severe storms would hit many coastal cities. Tropical illnesses like malaria, dengue fever, and the Zika virus would spread across Europe. Recent extreme weather events show that immediate and preventative measures are necessary to protect people in risk areas. To discover what might happen in the future, Martina Doppen is visiting the University of Utrecht's Earth Simulation Lab. She has an appointment with biogeomorphologist Maarten Kleinhans. He and his team are researching how seawaters find their way inland via estuaries and rivers. The geological structures of the Netherlands were created this way 500 million years ago. From the results, Kleinhans concludes that humans have no option but to move out of the endangered regions and yield to the water.
The Dutch will tell you that the solution is that we are very powerful in water management and engineering. We need to build bigger dikes and all that. And that's mostly rubbish, actually. What really needs to happen is that we stop climate change as soon as possible, because that's the cause of it all. And it's not just the Netherlands we need to worry about, but the rest of the planet. And 1/3 of the world's population is living in low-lying areas, river floodplains, coastal areas, deltas, and all those areas are going to be in big trouble.
Martin Kleinhans sees only one solution: the rapid phasing out of fossil fuels like oil and coal. His words bolster climate activist Martina Doppen ahead of her visit to the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow.
I cannot close my eyes and ignore it. It's just, this is the only right thing to do. And it really touches me, it holds me it keeps me awake during the night. So I'm just very worried, and the only thing to deal with this is taking action. And yeah, so for me it's just the only way.
The North Sea coast of the Netherlands. By the end of the century, sea levels could have dramatically risen here, swamping this coal-fired steelworks too. Yet since the court victory against Shell, Martina Doppen thinks there is a good chance that its owners might switch away from fossil fuel.
So up until now, Tata Steel is the biggest polluter of the Netherlands, and they really have to change fast to make sure that we reach our goal for the Paris Agreement. And about a year ago, they were saying, yeah, we will keep on going using coal as an energy source for our industry. But after the court case, we were invited, Milieudefensie and Donald was invited to Tata Steel, and they told us we know that we have to go faster. And I think they're also scared, because if they won't change, then we will start a new court case. We will keep on going.
The route to a climate-neutral future. We might be able to speed up this process by taking the fight to the courts. But what humanity needs is for governments, business, climate activists and societies all around the world to pull together to achieve this goal.